and I was leaving Conan, and he called me up and was like, Vince McMahon on the phone. I'm like, holy shit. And
Wow.
come on down to the office. And I was like, oh, okay. He's like, why don't you come down and consult on a couple shows? I went to his office in Connecticut and I said, I really boobed my way into it because I said, frankly, Vince, I planned to move to California, but I had to come down to see your office, and I'd love to go to a couple shows and consult, but it's not in it for me, which kind of made him want me more, I guess, to be like, oh, he's saying no. But
Right.
I didn't fucking, realize that, or I didn't manipulate that situation. So I went to a couple, and it was so amazing because back then they cut the airline ticket right in the office, like with a printer. It was pre 9/11. I was like, oh, this is and the two fucking $1,000 checks for two shows, and I was like, I left. I was like, this is the greatest thing in the world. This is the greatest meeting I've ever had. It was like, so I went to a couple shows, and then he's like, why don't you come back next week? Because we were in Nassau and in New York, and I met Vince Russo, and I was kind of like, just like helped produce a couple segments, but kind of just hung around and like, okay, well, you know what? Next week, I don't think I'm going to go anymore. That's kind of like, I don't want to, get paid for something I'm not going to do. And Vince Russo told me, he goes, just go to TV and Madison, just go next week. It'll be like, just one more time. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I went the next week, Madison Square Garden, Vince and Shane. He's like, okay, we need to talk to you. And it was like, hey, fucking Vince Russo's jumped ship. It was like that day, and I was like, oh, holy shit! Because I told my girlfriend at the time, like, oh, I'm gonna go see everything and then come back and probably tell them, it was fun or whatever. And he's like, yeah, we gotta redo the show. There's no show, and so we're just like flying by the seat of our pants. And I'm like, holding like, oh, well, I'm going to these two shows. Suddenly, I just was started working like that, and then even that day, Vince, who's so like smart, it was so weird. He's like, sit up at the production table and like, here, run through the matches, and no one knew who I was. Like, people don't even go in Vince's dressing room, and like, who's this guy? And I'm like, well, the next match will be this, and it was like, oh, this is fucking crazy. And then the next day we went to Nassau, and that was the real unfortunate when Draws got paralyzed, and I was
Wow.
like down there like for that, and I remember like everything, and then I was like driving back to Manhattan where I lived, and I got lost, and I was like in Staten Island, and I came home about 4 in the morning, and I told my girlfriend, I'm like, I think I'm working for pro wrestling, and I stopped I was moving to California, and I just stopped that, and I was like, well, I can't be old and never to do this, and just try to do this. And I did it, and I worked there for 5 months without even a deal,
Wow.
because I just said like, okay, it was so hectic, because there was no,
And
it was like
time and
yellow
time
card
and
right in
time
Memphis.
and time went by like that, right?
I didn't even know what was going on, and I'm like, and then I was honestly, because I had money for Conan and everything, and I was like, okay, we'll work it out later, handshake. And then I'm about 4 or 5 months in, and I'm like, I don't have any. I don't even know what my deal is. Like, and then I'm kind of like, someone said, like, you are working for wrestling promoters. I'm like, yeah, that is a fucking stupid move. What am I doing? And then I remember talking to Shane, and this is where I really boobed it. And I'm like, yeah, I got to get some kind of deal, going to get some back pay, And he's like, all right. And he gives a piece of paper, just like in the movies, like, write down the number. I'm like, huh, okay, made this much. I kind of put.
That's
So I
the
wrote down
worst.
a number, a nice number, and I gave it to him, and he's like, all right. And I'm like, oh, fuck, give it back.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really,
Yeah, let me do that again.
God damn it.
yeah.
I didn't know what I could have wrote down, but